Well, the good news is I have excellent coverage at home. In fact, the whole north end of my village has excellent coverage. So and they're very happy about it. What they're not happy about is I'm moving in 2 weeks, which means it will go away again. So I'm going to talk about, funny enough, small cells. I'm going to take a little bit of a different perspective from others who followed here before. I'm also going to talk about smart cells this as well, because that is a very hot topic amongst quite a number of the industry, including quite a number of operators. So, just going to go through a basic definition of what small cells is about. This is my view of the world. I'm not going to say I've got the broadest view of the world, but it is, I think, it is valid for all of us to put into perspective what we're actually talking about here. So if we look at the top here, we have the different segments which we're addressing with small cells. So small cell forum definition of home, enterprise, urban, rural, indoor, outdoor. These are not absolute splits, but they're more representative. Before the mobile data revolution, those heady days a few years ago, microcells were defined really for outdoor use. They did go into indoor, but they were primarily really about outdoor, urban canyon. I'm not talking about macro cells here, this is purely small cell. And picocell, often coupled with DAS, went into enterprises. And more recently, femtocells coming. All of these were really about voice coverage, in some cases about some voice capacity. The data really wasn't the big issue, it certainly wasn't the driving factor, the primary driving factor. Then we have the data revolution, which we all know about and all contribute to. And things look very different. Femtocells actually haven't massively changed, although, as we heard from Optus this morning, femtocells themselves, now it's not just about coverage, it's about end user experience, home tariffing. Enterprise is quite dramatically changing. Enterprise using femtocell technology, the total cost of ownership is about 1/4 of that of using DAS and Pico. So it completely changes the economics. It also, because these things go through IT channels and not just through the operator, traditional RF planning channels, then actually this becomes very scalable. So this is you'll see on the next slide when I show some just how big some of these market segments are, is a massive, in fact, it's the biggest segment for small cells. And then when we start looking at the metro zone, there's been a huge amount of talk about lampposts, putting cells outdoors. Actually, 70% of data is indoors. So there is already, and I'll come on to that, I'm going to focus on the metro indoor for this next part. There is already a very significant number of metro indoor cells going in around the world, and these do much of the heavy lifting of the data capacity in the metro zone. Metro outdoor, we've heard a lot about that one already. And then rural macros, very simple. We have found quite a lot of interest in small cells used in rural areas, particularly where backhaul is a problem, because backhaul very often is very costly. So in Japan, for example, it takes a year to get the backhaul to a village if they use traditional backhaul. So using femto-based technology with satellite backhaul, they can put these in a day. And this is now spreading outside of Japan, so rural again is not a big segment, but it's a really important segment for small cells. And it is important because it reaches right across the world way beyond just the first world. And we'll see that the small cell technology will be able to provide coverage and capacity where it just hasn't been possible before in the past. So here is size of the addressable market. These are ABI numbers. When you look at it, you actually see, as I mentioned, enterprise, the biggest segment there. By 2015, 3.8 billion. Indoor small cells, so those are the metro type cells I was talking about, 1.5 billion. And then the outdoor lampposts, about 1.4 billion. And and residential about a billion. So just think about the relative sizes of these different segments. So, we all know about acute data demands, and one of the great things about Metro Indoor is actually there are a lot of sites, and we have some good examples. We have already over 50,000 Metro Indoor public cells deployed around the world, primarily in Asia. The reason why this happens is, as I said, because that is where the data is being consumed. The real hotspots are actually the indoor. Also, because they're indoor, it provides the RF isolation, and therefore it's a lot easier to reuse the spectrum from the inside out. We've put these in locations where it really is quite from the outdoor side. There's no way to put more capacity, even at the metro outdoor there, in the existing locations, until LTE really starts to pick up, and therefore the only option they have is to do the indoor. So that is significant. These are all running in open mode, and I'll come into some of the challenges. So I'm going to dig into some quite more depth in this area on the indoor, and some of the field data which we have back from that. So this is an example of this is from a set of different deployments. So these are looking more at the extremes of what we actually see. So we have cells 90% or even more smartphones, which doesn't necessarily surprise everybody. And then data dominating signaling, so up to 10:1 data to signaling rate, data to voice, data dominating voice, 10:1, 24 hours, 10,000 sessions on a small cell. Traditionally, what people will badge as a 16-call small cell. Actually, the voice call side is irrelevant, or almost irrelevant, because some of these cells can be just data. But actually, as you'll see on the next slide, the voice really is a minor part of it. So really intense. We've seen in one case 22,000 sessions in a day on one single small cell. There is, again, I'll come on to, there's a balance, a sensible balance you reach to ensure that you meet the end user need for performance. You can't have everybody with 2 kilobits per second, so you have to be sensible about it. Also, signaling procedures. This is not all about just the actual bearer traffic. So we've seen up to 50 per user in the busy hour. So these are smartphones, up, down. Their apps bringing up the radio access bearer, pinging their email servers, etc., all sorts of applications. And then very highly transient users, so as low as 7 minutes in a cell, up to around about 30 minutes in a cell. Those are the averages. Now, obviously there are some who just pass through the cells very quickly, but it's a really different profile. It's a very, very different profile from, say, Wi-Fi, where Wi-Fi and hotspots tends to be quite a lot longer than 7 minutes, a lot longer than 7 minutes. Now here's a chart which makes it a little bit expand. I'm not going to go through the real data here, the details of this, but it's just to really draw a picture. So macro cells tend to average over voice users and data users, whereas with the small cells, these indoor metro cells, what happens is you really do have a really dominant data usage, and therefore it correlates around data as opposed to being a more of a mix, which you'll get in an outdoor environment where a lot more people using voice. So what this is an example of an actual cafe in a particular country in Asia, which I can't say which one. And these are the UE routes, so the mobile phone radio access bearer. The purple is data, HSPA, data. The orange is data and voice, and the green is voice. And along the bottom is time, so it's a 9-minute time capture slot during the day. And up the side are mobile phones. So each of the numbers up the side represents a mobile phone. You see it tapers round as it goes up, and that's because new phones are joining all the time. And then you'll see them dropping off. So this is a running picture which we get out of all the cells as to how they're actually performing, what the data traffic profile is. So you see purple is data, and really making the point, this is completely dominated by data. And you've got some users there who are almost in permanent transmission. So at a simple level, there's a trade-off between how much data a user gets and how many users you support in a cell. It's not quite as simple as that, though. What we find when you put a small cell, a metro cell, into an environment, if you put it in a busy hour, it is immediately, or within minutes, it's 100% occupied. It just sucks up the users around in the environment. So, actually, the challenges are not so much these headline data rates. They're really about cell overloading, camp-on attempts. So if you've got these cells where you suddenly get a swarm of users trying to camp on, that could be they're on a railway station and 1,000 people get off the train. You need to be able to manage that. But you need to be able to manage that at the same time as ensuring that you provide good service to the users on the cell. In fact, that's the priority. You need to ensure that. But you have to do this gracefully. You can't start just rejecting users and leaving them in limbo somewhere. You still got to do it in a graceful fashion. And then it's the challenge of data versus signaling, as I say, which we quite often just throw into the data case, but actually it's as much to do about signaling. That box there is an example of a 3G LTE Wi-Fi tri-mode cell that we have, which is a so-called G7 series for indoor use. So, we at Ubiquisys, this is my pitch bit, as my marketing guy would say. Active radio, this is all about the fundamentals of femtocell. Our aim is zero touch, and everything we've learned within that gets applied across each of the different segments, with the idea of making it as simple as possible, hands-off as possible. Okay, so maybe my mother-in-law isn't going to install a Metro hotspot, but the principle still applies. So for Active Cell, which we have introduced, which is really about these Metro hotspot behaviour. Open mode operation is considerably more challenging than closed mode. Closed mode is, of course, where you just have a limited number of users on a home femtocell. You can't just take, as Simon said yesterday, you just can't take consumer femtocell hardware and software and put it out there in the field. Consumer femtocell cells have a few users a day. These things are 100%, and they will reject the users that are not on their white list. And in this case, anybody and anybody can come onto this cell. So automatic cell sizing, auto C-pitch tuning, those types of techniques. Then the loaded cell adaptive radio. We have these capabilities where we can constantly listen to the surrounding environments of cells of the macro network. So the small cells are changing over to effectively to become a mobile phone for a fraction of a second, and switching back to be a base station. And during that time, you capture what is going on around in the environment, and you make the necessary changes to adapt to that environment. Hotspot robustness, I talked about tube stations or railway station, the trains, users coming in droves. These cells are, as I say, 100% utilised in busy hour, so they have to be able to manage themselves. And then really optimizing the signaling, because it's not necessarily obvious, but you say things like fast dormancy, what sounds like a great idea, well, it produces a massive amount of signaling. So you have to find ways, and we can do this at the edge, of keeping that signaling to an absolute minimum.